Welcome back. We're discussing the 13th Prime Minister of Canada, John Diefenbaker, and join me to discuss his latest book is Bob Plamondon. Thank you again, Bob, for joining us. I want to wrap up this last segment by speaking about the Canadian identity and Canadian pride, especially vis-a-vis what we're seeing south of the border. In the past several years, we have seen almost a resurgence. There have been a couple touch points where we've seen a resurgence in Canadian pride. First, one could say the trucker convoy kind of really bolstered that. And then obviously now in response to the Trump tariff threats, we've seen a resurgence in Canadian pride and identity. And as we discussed, John Diefenbaker was a champion of Canadian identity. What shaped his views and how was he effective in promoting that identity?
So what shaped his views, I'd say first would be Sir John A. Macdonald, who cobbled this country together, improbable as it was, to withstand the continental pressure of the United States. Diefenbaker had great admiration for Macdonald and inherited his vision. As much as Macdonald had the national vision, Diefenbaker had the northern vision, which was to develop roads to resources and rail lines to resources, to not nationalize our industry, but Canadianize our industry, to have greater control of our economic powers and to diversify our economy. So he got along reasonably well with Dwight Eisenhower, but he did not get along at all with John Diefenbaker, John Kennedy.
John F. Kennedy, yes.
John F. Kennedy, who fairly early on made it his mission to see Diefenbaker defeated. And we've never seen, and probably will never see such a case of foreign election interference as John F. Kennedy trying to have Diefenbaker defeated. Now, that was over personality, but it was also over policy, particularly during the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Kennedy expected John Diefenbaker to do whatever he asked, ready, I ready, whatever you want, just yes, sir. But Diefenbaker wanted to have, he wanted to stick up for Canadian interests, and he didn't want us to be seen as too cozy with the Americans. He wanted us to have a voice and a presence on the world stage and not to be seen as a satellite of the United States.
Yeah, and it was very palpable, the tension, because whenever they'd have a presser, there'd always be some gaffe or some jab from one to the other. Or it was quite interesting when I was doing research for the show to see how that relationship, I knew that there were issues in that relationship, but just to see the pointed barbs and things, it was quite interesting. So is there something our current Prime Minister, Mark Carney, for example, can learn from Prime Minister John Diefenbaker as he seems to tackle the same issues, dealing with American threats of expansionism, dealing with potential tariff war? We're in the middle of one. What can be learned from John Diefenbaker?
So it's not just John Diefenbaker. I would go back to Macdonald. I'd even say to Jean Chrétien that, how did, when I go back to Chrétien, for example, how did he say no to George Bush and keep us out of the Iraq War, yet still maintain decent relations and strong economic relations, that you can exercise your political sovereignty and still trade with other nations and not compromise on that sovereignty for the sake of a deal, because business is done for business reasons, and the economy has its own pressures and weights. So it is to put Canadian sovereignty first in that relationship, and not be seen as under the thumb of the United States or doing their bidding, and negotiating from a position of strength and being tough with the Americans. So we should not feel that we can't stand up to them.
No, I appreciate that. And again, we seem to be, or history just keeps repeating itself, because we're back to where we were perhaps when John Diefenbaker was Prime Minister, where the U.S. is trying to cajole us to do certain things, and we're saying, hang on, we're a separate country, we do things our own way. Just as we wrap up here, let's finish off by saying John Diefenbaker was known as a man of contradictions, idealistic, but sometimes politically isolated. Do you think those contradictions strengthened or weakened his leadership?
So I wouldn't use the word contradiction. I would say he was very much independent, almost independent from his own party. So he did not curry favor within his caucus. He didn't even attend caucus meetings. And so there was this connection that he had with ordinary people and Canadians, and they loved him for it. They loved him, till the very end. The contradiction is he wasn't political within his own party, and so that caused him some struggles when things got a little bit hazy during the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bank of Canada crisis. When he needed support, they weren't always there for him.
Okay, Bob, it's been a pleasure to have you on. I appreciate it. And for those watching at home, we'll see you next time on Counterpoint.